This is how space elevators happen, Gordon. Enjoy.
Honey badger rips the face off the puppet master, chews it up like a honey bastard, spit it out into your carpet pasta. The honey badger.
Where's the binder, Joe? Please tell me you didn't give her the binder. The assembly language code, the IBM BIOS.
Damn it, you wanted her back on track. Don't put this on me. You basically told me to give it to her.
This scene really lays bare the essence of the conflict between Joe and Gordon and pretty much everyone else. Joe really does think he's done what Gordon asked him to do, except he's made several inferences that Gordon can't possibly be held responsible for. And that's the thing. When someone tells Joe to get to B, they think he's going to go from A to B. But that's not how Joe rolls. Joe's going to start at Z, hit every single letter in the English alphabet on the way down, pick up a few from the Cyrillic alphabet, throw in a few kanji just because they're interesting, and then plop out on B. And the resultant spaghetti will make perfect sense to Joe and no sense to anyone else. Let me use an example, a more concrete example. Gordon might tell Joe, we need to get to Phoenix as quickly as possible. And what Joe will do is build a gravity elevator so he can take an orbital transit shuttle to Phoenix within 5 minutes. And then Gordon will be looking up at this hundreds of miles long steel cable as thick as a football field and just not be able to make the connection between it and getting to Phoenix. Be saying something like, why didn't you buy a Greyhound ticket? We think that Joe created this plan prior to even initiating contact with Gordon, but it's entirely possible that this plan that Joe had was created in conjunction with what Gordon was telling him.
I'm sorry, but you missed it. We all did.
Gordon, wait. That's why we do it as Cardiff Electric.
Are you out of your mind? Buzzards like Bosworth and Cardiff would never go for something
So
like
we
that.
forced their hand.
Force their hand? How are you going to force their hand?
Let me worry about that part.
This is how space elevators happen, Gordon. When Joe says, let me worry about it, that is precisely the moment you need to start worrying about it. Gordon said Nathan and Boz would never agree to create a PC. And Joe took him at his word.
And myself as the heavy hitter you need to legitimize your sales force, this company, this region.
I just need someone to come in here and blow the balls off the numbers, Joe.
All I want you to do is blow the balls off the numbers. Boz, you're leaving way too much to interpretation here.
Selling system software. I probably would have made you a couple $100,000.
You listen to me, boy.
I draw the line at you claiming that you did me a favor.
In the first 2 episodes, Joe is actually doing what people are asking him to do. Boz wants sales, Gordon wants to build a computer. So he's trying to figure out how to make both of them happy. In the long term, at least.
I need you to understand that I did what I did because it was right. Not just for me, for you, for everybody. If I had come in here a week ago and asked nicely, you would have laughed me out of the room.
But everybody else just cannot make the connection between what Joe did and what they asked him to do. Joe goes Joe logic way, which nobody else understands. And incidentally, this is why I don't find Joe to be inconsistent at all as a character. A lot of people complain that Joe came across in the first episodes, or even the first season, as being sort of all over the place. He's not. He is a very brilliant guy who's also a complete ditz. And if you give him room to interpret, he will. And I don't think he can help himself. He's got this complexity addiction. Rather than taking a road, driving down a road to get to an observatory, Joe will hike 24 to 36 miles through rough terrain just because. That's how he thinks. Just so he can see everything along the road. The problem that Gordon and Joe have to work on to be able to work together, and that problem is Gordon knows how to get from A to B, and he knows how to just shut down the silliness, just no nonsense, right? If he wants Joe to get to B, Gordon is going to have to keep Joe on a very short leash. By anyone's measure, this is a really bad day for Joe. Insulted by Bosworth, yelled at by Gordon, metaphorically raped by Dale, and now responsible for the lost livelihoods of dozens of people caught in the crossfire. And lest we forget, physically raped by Cameron. So, let's cue the nervous breakdown. I think Joe has earned it.
Where did you go wrong? Why is this store going out of business?
Sound quality's great. People just don't want to invest.
He didn't see it coming.
Look, man, I don't know what this is about, but hey, don't do that. And, you're gonna touch it, you're gonna buy it, all right? You're gonna buy the stickers. Is that your job? Come on, you can't see it. Why are you even here?
Looks like he wants to drown out the voices screaming in his head.
Cozy. What do you want?
Sadly, I can't stay. Headed back in the 9:30 red-eye tonight. Wanted to take care of one last thing before we left, though. When you walked out, you never gave formal notice. $615.38.
I did over $2 million worth of damage to the data center.
After the insurance claim, we ended up making money on that deal, too. Consider your IBM employee file officially closed.
And now we find out that despite it all, despite the amount of damage Joe has done, breaking a water main, doing $2 million worth of damage to IBM's data center, walking out and disappearing for a year and a half, despite everything, Dale still wants him back.
That is, unless you come back with us on the plane tonight. We even booked you a seat, just in case.
Of course, when Joe rejects his offer...
I like it here.
But I promised your old man I'd give it a shot. I'd say he'll be disappointed. But he's pretty disappointed already. You may like it out here now. But let's see what happens when they find out what you really are.
Dale deflects blame onto Joe's father, poisons their relationship a bit more, and threatens Joe. What a peach. I don't think getting raped by Cameron was Joe's first workplace rodeo. And also, since we know he's not talking about Joe being a sociopath because Joe isn't, what the hell does this mean?
Let's see what happens when they find out what you really are.
But despite it all, Joe rallies and has an epiphany. The computer needs a handle!
People need to be able to take it anywhere. It's going to have a handle.
A handle? Oh, my God, Joe, to you, this changes everything. A handle. What a revolutionary idea.
This is exactly the problem. If Joe can have the fact that he's facing potential jail time slip his mind, he cannot be trusted to keep in all the factors, to incorporate all of the factors required to create a plan that doesn't have gaping holes. Joe needs someone who is more skeptical than himself, and, let's face it, just a touch more ruthless, because I get the sense that Joe is going to be kicking himself about this situation for a very long time. And so the final lesson you need to take from all of this is do not let the ditzy optimist do all of the planning. It doesn't work.
You used to work at IBM. That was before you came here and ruined several people's lives, an entire company.
Before me, you were boozing that building, and your balls were in a box by your wife's bedside table. Stop it, man!
Holy shit.
Okay, so this entire episode has been about exposing Joe exposing his vulnerabilities, exploiting his flaws, and now we're having a literal explosion.
There are some boys in my school who used to chase me. I cared about Sputnik. I was nuts about it. I was passionate. Nobody told me yet that adults are supposed to be ashamed of those feelings. To this day, I don't blame them. I don't think they meant to chase me off the roof. And I'd read your article, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Open architecture, the idea of it, as a way of life. It kept me up at night. It made me that kid again. And I tracked you down to Comdex and watched as they chased you, too, and your beautiful machine right off the ledge.
Joe is doing something that I've seen my husband do. For example, he'll be talking about the fact that all of the friends that he had in high school, all of the male friends he had in high school are dead because of either drug abuse, drug overdose, or suicide, except for one. He'll be really upset and doing that thing that men do where their eyes get red but they don't actually cry. And then he will suddenly slip into selling himself or selling his worth. And he's upset and selling at the same time. And I've had to call him out on it and said, don't disappear into the sale. You know, we're talking about something that's obviously bothering you. You don't need to start selling yourself. And I realize that the reason why men do this is throughout human history, men have always been on the outside looking in and having to prove that they have utility and use to other people. And the moment that they're vulnerable, they translate that into being useless. So what do? They start to sell themselves. Instead of sticking with that emotional vulnerability, they start to try to explain to you how they really have a worth so that they don't get thrown out. And that's what Joe is doing here. He is still really emotionally upset about the situation, about what he's talking about in his past. He's in a lot of pain. And he's disappearing into the sale. Because he can't stay with that vulnerability. Because of precisely that. When a man is vulnerable, he's useless. And when men are useless, they know they're out the door.
And you, when I saw you, everything about you threatens people.
Everything about you threatens people. Cameron, I think you've blown out Joe's positivity circuit. And I like the way he looks like he's cringing away from her as he says that.
Everything about you threatens people. Tomorrow I will show up at 7 a.m. and I will keep going. You don't have to join me. Something tells me you both need this just as much as I do.
Okay. I actually throw this out to the crowd because I can't actually answer this. So I understand why Gordon is in the parking lot, because he's waiting for Cameron and he's worried about going to jail. So he wants to make sure that Cameron didn't give IBM the BIOS. And I understand why Cameron's in the parking lot, because she basically lives in Cardiff. But for the life of me, I do not know how Joe figured out that Gordon was in the parking lot. I mean, I guess we can assume telepathy. Like, I mean, it's consistent with his supernatural empathy, I suppose. But anyway, I'll throw it out to the viewers. Can you explain why Joe would know where Gordon was? In this episode, Joe's gone up against two real heavies, and he's lost both fights badly. And the reason why he's lost both fights speaks a lot to his actual character. He didn't predict what Cameron would do, nor did he predict what Dale would do, because both of them are utterly ruthless. They both have the stomach to inflict more damage on their opponent than Joe does. In Dale's case, he's willing to go against good business sense to get revenge. Cardiff's systems were established as only being slightly cheaper than IBM's. Dale undersold Cardiff by hundreds of thousands of dollars. And not just on one-time deals. He undersold Cardiff on 5-year software packages. Saying Dale slit Cardiff's throat and let them bleed out like a hog on a hook doesn't quite capture the full scope of what Dale did. Dale sliced one of Big Blue's veins, just so he could drown Cardiff in the blood. All to assert dominance over Joe. Now that's ruthless. This is the one thing that makes me sympathize more with Joe than Gordon. Joe invests a lot emotionally in Gordon. He doesn't just want Gordon to do this PC, to create this PC. He really wants Gordon to like him. Now, I know Joe can bully and bluster, and he certainly has a mouth on him that should be registered as a lethal weapon, but he never stops investing in Gordon emotionally and supporting Gordon as a builder. For Joe, there's a we. For Gordon, there's only Gordon. I can also understand why Gordon just doesn't know how to take Joe, because Joe sort of comes across as this over-friendly Great Dane of a man who's just run down a deer and dragged the mutilated corpse to Gordon's back porch. Gordon's sort of going, and Joe's going, I brought you a gift. Can I lick your face? One of the big problems that I think came out of this situation was that Gordon should have actually been Cameron's direct supervisor, not Joe. He had the skills to decide if she was slacking or not, and he wouldn't give her shit a single inch. Joe's too optimistic about people. Gordon recognizes bullshit when he sees it, and I'm sure if Cameron tried her little offer you can't refuse rape ploy on Gordon, Gordon's pimp hand would have proved very strong. So that's one of the issues that I think they were up against, is the wrong person was in charge of Cameron. Necessarily in order to abide by the legal restrictions that they were under. Gordon would have kept her in check. Joe... Ironically, Joe is not as tough as Gordon. The final scene in the second episode is a callback to the first scene when we first were introduced to Joe. And I think it functions in the same way. The creators put it in to tell you, pay attention to the basketball. And they've done that because in this second episode, they have sent through a whole stampede of gigantic invisible gorillas. Everything's Joe's fault, right? The audience builds him into a manipulative sociopath instead of seeing what's actually going on right in front of their eyes. And what's actually going on is an intricate interplay of competing interests, pressures, and bad decision-making. With some rape. Welcome to today's bonus round, where we review the reviews of Halt and Catch Fire. This particular review I'll put a link to in the low bar because it has to be seen to be believed, or read to be believed. Let me quote some of this review. And just a warning, fair warning, this is a review of the entire season, and I'm just quoting the stuff related to this particular episode. Lee Pace says the following in regards to Cameron ending up in the basement. When I think about how we approach that second episode where Joe takes Cameron and puts her in the room downstairs. Mackenzie Davis chimes in with the word dungeon. Lee Pace, yeah, that's so he can control her and give her what she needs so that he can get what he wants out of her. I mean, it's twisted. Mackenzie Davis, but I think she subverts that right away by raping him. Joe put Cameron in a dungeon. And the fact that Cameron was in the basement by her own choice and everyone in Cardiff, including Joe, was shitting bricks about it because it put them all in legal jeopardy, that just gets flushed down the memory hole. Seriously. Joe put Cameron in a dungeon. Did you... Were you in a waking coma while you acted out this episode? Joe went down into the basement to try to get Cameron back into the clean room. She went there on her own reconnaissance and refused to leave. I mean, did you forget, Mr. Pace, did you forget uttering the lines, "Go back to your terminal"? Because that's what Joe wanted Cameron to do, to go back to her terminal and write BIOS code. These two are playing off of each other. They're lobbying obvious bullshit back and forth, and Mr. Feinberg, the reporter, is buying it. Davis and Pace are skating right into Crazy Town, no fucks given. This creative team, as far as I can tell, is giving the press the middle finger. And they're able to get away with it because we agency sync male characters and men in general. And because the press doesn't do the least amount of research. If Mr. Feinberg had actually watched the show he was reviewing, he would have known that they were stringing him along. But he didn't, because he didn't do his homework, or he did watch the show and he thinks in lazy stereotypes. These people are a merry band of lunatics, stealing credibility from the press like a modern-day Robin Hood. And after dealing with the press for 2 years, I'm rather enjoying watching Halt and Catch Fire's creative team turn the press into a bunch of idiot patsies for whatever long troll game they're playing. And I'm actually deeply curious what their end game is. For Joe, there's a we. For Gordon, there's only Gordon. And the other thing is that Joe is... You realize that you're fucking the scene up. You've just screwed the scene up.